People tend to think of death as, maybe you're just dead, or you'll go to heaven or something like that. You see, it's just out there in the future. It's not connected to the present. What occurs after death is determined by how you live. It's determined by your state of consciousness. During life, the physical vehicle is present in people, and consciousness is limited by it, defined by the brain, nervous system, and body mechanism. Mind is trimmed down. Most of it is kept away by this barrier of brain and nervous system, you see. It's unconscious, it's in the unconscious, so to speak. So you can just live your life and on the basis of the stimulation of this bodily entity, and get out of it what you can in terms of pleasure and so on. That's the choice that many make. They don't understand what's on the other side of that barrier, and the barrier gets lifted at death. And you fall into the domain of the so-called unconscious. Before death, you make mind, and after death, mind makes you. Mind is your circumstance after death, and not just what you're thinking. The unconscious is your circumstance after death. You know the potential you have for bad dreams? Well, if you stay healthy and keep your mind focused on positive thoughts or whatnot, maybe you won't have a bad dream, but it's all there. It's there all the time, right? Well, see, after death, you don't have the physical means to prevent the unconscious from becoming conscious. Yes, if you use the body circumstance as a means to purify the mind, the unconscious that's outside the realm of the brain, cut off by the brain, you see, then those mechanisms will not control destiny after death. Whereas if you use your lifetime simply as an opportunity to indulge in basically bodily-based existence, you will do nothing but add to the sum total of karma in the unconscious. And all that becomes your destiny then. So you must get wisdom, you must understand. You must do sadhana and be purified of karma. People think that maybe the brain is it, maybe that's it, maybe mind is just brain, maybe when you're dead, you see. Well, it's not true. The brain, however, is a limiting mechanism. It keeps you from having certain kinds of experiences. It's not merely that the brain is here to evolve so you can have all experiences. The brain is here to keep you from having experiences, or to define what kind of experiences you can have. And most of what is potential is outside of the brain-mind area, not accessible as a general rule. Sometimes there are these openings and you have these unusual experiences, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. But for the most part, you remain in a state controlled by the brain-mind. You have those thoughts and experiences that relate to your present physicality, and so on. For the most part, this is what people experience. And they think that, therefore, that's it. That's what life is supposed to be. You see? They don't understand what the purpose is of having a limit placed on what you can experience. The purpose of it is for you to purify the karmic consciousness, the karmic mind that preceded the present birth. You must devote your life not to the fulfillment of the bodily personality, but to the purification of karma through the devotion of the bodily personality. So that in death, when you lose the vehicle that shuts off experience, and all experience is opened up to you, what you're opened up to will be auspicious. Because mind has been purified, attention has been given to its source. The degree to which you've done all of this, so in other words, the stage of life you represent, in manifestation will determine the quality of experience after death. Whereas during life in the body, you see, the body is a limit. People are always remarking, how come, if you perform good, right actions, you don't get good results? How come there are all these really bad guys having an apparently good life? You see, everything seems to happen good for them. How come? You got all these virtuous people and they're all suffering so terribly, you see. Well, in the context of bodily existence, results do not immediately follow, necessarily. The place where you're getting your results is outside the brain mind. You're getting results of purifying that unconscious, or you're getting the results of adding to it and complicating it, you see. So in the context of the body, a person can be performing actions that are building up karmic destiny, but in the present context of the body, it having its own destiny and tendencies, apparently what people might call good results are taking place. And some other person who's actually purifying the sum total of bondage, karmically, through right action, is having a difficult life, in many cases. As the more you mature in practice, the more you come to appreciate what's really going on, what kind of mechanism you are associated with. Yeah. People generally, especially Westerners, tend to make the casual choice of bodily self-fulfillment. This is also a tendency of the ego in general, no matter what the place of origin, East or West. But Westerners have a certain omega-like way of tending, you see. And I've observed in my work in the West that people struggle intensely against the demand for self-discipline. And they're always struggling with this notion, should they discipline themselves or should they just go for the good life, you see? They're always thinking about this nonsense, because you have so little experience, so little understanding of what's really taking place. You will not resort to wisdom. People generally do not resort to wisdom or to realizers, so they just go with the flow, so to speak, you see. But you're not going to experience a collective destiny after death, you say. You're going to experience a personal destiny, and one that goes beyond individuality ultimately. But in other words, you're not going to realize after death what everybody thought life was about. You're going to realize the sum total of your karmic tendencies. So you should use this lifetime of practice in my company to be purified of these tendencies. One could say that altogether sadhana basically is self-purification. Because it's not the divine that must be found, it's the things that you are deluding yourself with that must be released. The divine is the very context of existence. But self-contraction has taken on all kinds of forms, the summary of which is non-awareness of the divine condition. Sadhana then is basically purification from these forms of self-contraction. Sadhana then is not about the good life, what people would commonly call the good life, the Western idea of self-fulfillment and so on. It's not that at all. However, a person who does sadhana can, and rightly should in general, maintain positive life signs, healthful signs, positive relational signs, and so forth. All these are simply expressions of the disposition of sadhana, in fact. It's not about pursuing self-fulfillment, glorification of self, clinging to qualities of life, relationships, experiences, limitations and so forth for their own sake. The daily qualities of life may be generally whole and positive by your intention, but still you must do the sadhana of self-transcendence. And if the qualities of life at the moment are not all that positive, likewise, it's the same sadhana. From the point of view of sadhana, then, it doesn't make any difference whether the qualities of any given day are positive or negative, because you have to do the same thing in any case. And the import of this sadhana is not only relative to the destiny after death, it's relative to this lifetime also. But its fruits to be valued are not merely those of physical design. Rather, the great virtues of sadhana can be seen in terms of the advancement in the stages of life. So if one's practice matures and becomes most profound, then the state of consciousness is transformed. The general life signs become more and more characteristic of renunciation, and the quality of consciousness exhibits the characteristic of realization along the lines of one of the advanced or ultimate stages of life. This progressively. In general, then, the destiny after death corresponds to the realization while alive. And that being the case, then it is also clear that except in the case of absolute perfect enlightenment, after death, the opportunity for further growth must be given. But all that takes place, all that is given in the context of a paradox and a mystery of unfathomable proportions, and signs of time and space that are not comprehensible from the present bodily point of view. Fundamentally, it is, we could say, as I said, sadhana is a matter of self-purification. It's about, then, the outshining of all forms of limitation by the force of consciousness itself, by magnifying the force of consciousness itself, the force of love bliss itself. This purifies, this releases. That virtue is what you are coming into contact with in satsang with me. And as you mature, you become more and more responsible participant in that process of self-purification, or ultimately outshining, recognition and outshining. The divine reality is simply the absolute objectless expansiveness of mere being, without a trace of limitation. Self-radiant bliss, absolute. Between this apparition and such realization, there is much, much more than merely living, and much, much more than talking school. Attitudes and gestures. There's a real sadhana is necessary. Resort to grace is necessary. Grace must work. This is necessary.